Greetings viewers, Car Doctor here. Thank you for joining me at the Car Doctor Repair Studios in Anchorage, Alaska. It's a Monday morning, and Monday mornings are sometimes kind of one of the rougher mornings of the week. Sometimes after fishing and hunting and goofing around or just sitting in the recliner, sometimes it's a little bit tough to get the muscle groups functioning again. Came here first thing this morning and there's a Lincoln Continental with one of them donut tires on the front and the other one's flat and the tie rod ends are broke, and it's dumped in the middle of the entryway to the parking lot, which we share with about 10 other neighbors here. So it's always a treat getting going in the morning, but I think we're up and running now, and I've got a special treat today. I've got a 99 GMC Envoy. Basically it's the S series Chevrolet S Blazer, S-10 pickup, GMC Jimmy and Jimmy Envoy platform. This happens to be a four-wheel drive with a front torsion bar suspension, and today we're going to be doing upper and lower ball joints on the right front. And they came in the other day with a little clunking noise, and we found that the right front ball joints were worn. It looks like the left front's been done. You can do these in pairs. You can do both sides, or just the lower or just the upper. Doesn't really matter. You know, address the parts that are worn, but just know that in order to accomplish a front end alignment afterwards, it's always good to make sure that all your parts are tight, and the ones that are worn beyond limits should be replaced before a front end alignment can be completed. So today we're just going to do the right front upper and lower ball joints. We're going to service them on the control arms. The control arms are going to be left on the vehicle, and we're going to knock the ball joints out and replace them. I'm not sure. I think the ball joints are either riveted or bolted in to these control arms on these stamped steel control arms. But I haven't even really looked, other than just checking the ball joints and determining that they were loose. And so anyway, I've got a couple Moog parts that I'm using to replace these Moog upper and lower ball joints. And you know, this platform's probably safe to say 95 through 2005, something like that. Torsion bar 4x suspensions are going to be much similar. So I think this will be a good example for just about whatever S series you're working on within those date ranges, as long as it's four-wheel drive and not coil spring. So, but you might want to consult your repair manual for your particular model to double check the repair procedures and recommended torque settings and all that, and get it done right. Front end repairs are definitely a safety related issue. Improperly repaired front suspension components can result in a loss of control or an unsafe condition, and we don't want that. So you want to make sure you're qualified to do the repairs, and if not, just refer it to a qualified person that you can trust. Hey, if you find a good mechanic, stick with them. If you don't have a mechanic you can trust, you know, the internet is a great way to surf around and check reviews and ask around. Odds are there's going to be a few in your area that are reputable and take care of the customers and stand behind their work. And you know, there's a big trust issue with mechanics, rightfully so. There's just a few bad apples out there, but you know, for the most part, the folks that I've worked with, most of them have been competent mechanics and not hosing customers, and probably more problems of people just kind of maybe shouldn't be a mechanic than actually dishonest mechanics. So make sure they have, you know, a good reputation and long-term customer base, and that they stand behind their work and stick with those people. You know, sometimes a repair is just expensive. Don't just assume that that they're hosing you just because the price is high. So anyway, that said, there's a couple tools that you'll need for this procedure. A pair of pliers will help you with the hubcap removal, and a hammer. And there might be a couple other things you might need. So anyway, let's get to this. I've got the vehicle supported on the drive-on rack. I've got it lifted up under the lower control arm, supported just inside of the ball joint, so I can access it and press that out of there, or unbolt it or whatever. I don't even know how it's hooked in there. We're going to find out as we go. And the first order of business is to remove this tire. So let's get with it. Okay, I'm going to remove the axle nut, which is a 36mm nut on the end of the drive axle. Now I'm going to remove the disc brake caliper. I'm going to remove it at the 2 caliper mounting bolts on the back side. These take an 18mm socket. Now I'm going to slightly compress the brake caliper so I can remove it from the rotor. Then I'm going to use a small piece of wire to suspend the caliper and keep it from damaging the rubber brake hose. You want to support the caliper so that it doesn't stretch the rubber brake hose and cause damage to the hose, which could relate to an unsafe situation and loss of braking. I'm just sticking the screwdriver in the vanes of the rotor and slightly depressing the dual pistons of the caliper to facilitate removal. Now, with a few taps of a hammer, I should be able to remove the rotor from the hub. Now I remove any bracketry that retains the ABS wiring or the brake hose to the caliper. Now I'm removing the bolt that secures the brake hose to the upper control arm by placing a combination wrench on the back side of the upper control arm at the bolt, and then removing the nut on the outer face of the control arm at the bracket on the brake hose. As you can see, the upper and lower ball joints are attached with regular standard hex head bolts on this vehicle, and it's likely that these ball joints are a replacement ball joint, given the mileage and the fact that the original equipment was likely riveted to the control arms. If your vehicle has riveted ball joints, you'll need to remove the rivets by either grinding the head of the rivet off and punching them out, or using a high-powered air chisel with a chisel type bit, first removing the heads of the rivets and then driving the rivets through with a dowel type attachment for your air ratchet. However, in this case, all that's necessary is to remove the 4 bolts on the upper and lower ball joints to remove. First, we need to remove the ball joint stud retaining nut on the upper and lower ball joints by removing the cotter pin and loosening and removing both the upper and lower ball joint retaining stud nuts. Don't completely remove the lower ball joint nut as you want to retain the steering knuckle from falling completely off when you begin to pound on it to remove it from the control arms. Now I'm going to pound on the steering knuckle at the face of each upper and lower ball joint where the stud goes through in order to loosen it from the ball joint studs. Now remove the lower ball joint stud nut and remove the knuckle assembly as you slide it off of the axle and the ball joint studs. In this case, I needed to tap on the end of the axle to push it back into the hub as I was removing the knuckle assembly. Be sure to protect the threads of the axle shaft to allow for reinstallation. In this case, I threaded the axle nut onto the axle shaft before I tapped on the end of it. Now set your knuckle aside, but be careful not to damage the ABS wiring that's still connected. Support it with a wire if needed to keep it from stretching the ABS wiring. Now we just need to remove the 4 retaining bolts that fasten each upper and lower ball joint to the control arms and install the replacement ball joints. Make note of the location of any bracketry or hardware necessary for supporting the ABS wiring, and then be sure to reinstall that in the proper location on reinstallation of the new ball joint. After removing the ball joints, clean the surfaces of the control arm of any debris, and then prepare the replacement ball joints for installation. The upper ball joint has a 2-piece seal that includes a collar and a rubber seal that is installed with the slotted area facing away from the rotor, and then the ball joint goes on the upper side of the control arm, and then the seal assembly sandwiches the control arm from the lower side. Then the 4 retaining bolts go down from the top of the ball joint down with the nuts, locking nuts, on the lower side. Now in this case, the upper ball joint retaining bolt lock nuts are torqued to 10 to 12 foot-pounds torque. The lower ball joint also has a seal assembly that bolts to the bottom of the lower ball joint in position. You will notice that the lower ball joint has a grease zert that needs to be positioned so that the grease zert can pass through the lower control arm. It's actually not possible to install this ball joint in a different position because the bolt holes won't line up. Simply install the lower ball joint and the lower ball joint seal assembly underneath the lower control arm, passing the bolts down through the lower control arm, and then fastening with the locking nuts provided. Torque the lower ball joint retaining bolts to 25 foot-pounds torque. Now install the grease zerks in the upper and lower ball joint. Now reinstall the knuckle assembly by simultaneously inserting the axle into the hub and the lower ball joint stud into the knuckle assembly and gently pulling up and pressing the axle into the knuckle. Follow this by installing the upper ball joint stud into the upper position of the knuckle. Now torque the upper ball joint stud to 61 foot-pounds torque and the replacement lower ball joint stud to 85 foot-pounds torque as specified by the ball joint manufacturer. Please consult your repair manual for exact torque specifications and procedures for your given vehicle application. After torquing the upper and lower ball joint studs, it may be necessary to rotate the castellated nut to allow for insertion of the cotter pin. Simply rotate clockwise to the nearest position where the cotter pin can be inserted and insert and secure your cotter pin. Now resecure the brake line and ABS wiring harness where necessary. Now install the brake rotor and disc brake caliper. Now install and tighten the axle nut and properly torque it by inserting a screwdriver through the rotor vane, through the disc brake caliper, and using a torque wrench to tighten. Now be sure to grease the upper and lower ball joints before reinstalling the tire. Now reinstall the tire and properly torque the lug nuts. All right, well, that about wraps things up here on this one. This Monday's not turning out too bad so far. Everything went pretty smooth, and you know, the fact that it looks like it's been replaced before, it probably saved me maybe upwards of a half hour to an hour labor extra in worrying about those original equipment rivets that those ball joints are installed with. I do have another video that outlines removal of the rivets with an air hammer. You need a stout air hammer to knock those out, but if you have the right tools and equipment, it's a pretty sweet deal and will save you some time if you run into those. I forgot to mention you can also use a cutting torch if it comes down to it. Just make sure that you don't heat the control arm with that, which could result in changing the metallurgy and fatiguing that control arm. You can also replace the control arm on these as one other way of servicing the ball joints, but that's a little more labor intensive, especially with the lower, because this is a torsion bar suspension. You'd have to unload it and remove the shock and remove the entire control arm assembly. Maybe that's something we could do at a later date here. The next time I get one in with bad bushings, we might do that. But in the meantime, this thing is ready for a front end alignment to finish it up, and I'll get this guy back on the road and he'll be safe. No more clunking on the right front every time he turns, which was his complaint, but other than that, there was a slight amount of tire wear, and of course very unsafe to have loose suspension parts on your car. You don't want that, and the other people on the road don't want that. Hey, thanks for tuning in to the Car Doctor channel. This is Car Doctor from the Car Doctor Studios in Anchorage, Alaska, wishing you good luck with your repairs. Thanks for watching. Take care.